Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you, but I would like also to for us to wait a few minutes because it seems that many people we're receiving mails that they have problems with receiving the connection link. So we will delay our start for 5 minutes in order to address that. Thank you. Okay, so let me start, please. So I would welcome all of you, and hopefully, okay, and more people are joining in, which is good. So what I would like to say, just as an opening, is that Open Science Fair. This is the third Open Science Fair. After one, we started an open air initiative started in 2017, and then 2000 in Athens, and then 2019 in Porto. where we were able to gather all the communities and actually have a fair around open science. This time we went on online as everybody else. Hopefully next time this will not happen. And but what this gave us the opportunity to collaborate very actively with organizations around the world. I will name the co-organizers, CORE, which is the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, IFEL, Force 11, La Referencia, Liber, Spark, and Spark Europe and Operas. So that means that we were able, many open science initiatives around the world, to join forces and organize a program where our theme this year was about fostering local and global open science communities. Having said that, we would like to say, and I would like to say that this is what we noticed is, and you will notice from the program, is that the program is mostly shaped by the communities. So the communities are organizing the workshops, they're organizing the speakers, they're organizing the attendance. And so it seems like Open Science Fair is truly becoming a fair. It's becoming a community forum. And we are really glad and happy to do that. Just a few things on the program. We have 4 full days. We try to shape the program in the morning, mainly for one part of the world, and in the afternoon for the other part of the world. Across the Atlantic or across the Pacific. It's depending on where you are. Trying to incorporate a little bit of everything for everyone. So it's about technicalities, so it's about communities, it's about policies, it's about everything. What you will see is that we have a dynamic, actually it's a dynamic thing. We have 17 workshops organized by communities. We have 36 lightning talks because it's really nice to give a forum for everyone who's doing something on open science in their country to bring it forward so we all learn from each other. And of course, we have the demos, the technical, mostly technical, not all, but mostly technical demos, who can showcase the services that they are implementing for the open science. So this is part of the program. Going forward, before I introduce today's program, let me see how I can do that. I would like to do some small housekeeping. So we decided this year to go with Zoom webinar and Zoom meetings. The reason was because we wanted the workshops to be interactive, as much as interactive as possible, and we wanted the communities to design and shape their own 1.5 hour slot. I will just give you some, I think, by now, all of us know the rules of Zoom. So as an attendee, this is a Zoom webinar. You can submit questions on the chat. We have people from the organizing committees, from the organizing from the organizations who participate in this to man the chat, so they will pass on the questions to the Q&A. So you can virtually raise your hand to ask a question or comment, and we need our host and we'll need to give you access. And then of course, the questions in the chat. So also, what we would like to say is that this event will be recorded, and it's also being live streamed now. And we have a few people watching it on YouTube on the Open Science Fair channel. We would like to ensure that your microphone is muted during the presentations and unmute if the organizers foresee specific interaction with participants. Also, this is true not just for the webinars, but also for the meetings. And all the presentations will be posted in the Open Science Fair website or community in Zenodo. And the recordings will be available both in Zenodo and the Open Science Fair YouTube. Last but not least, a few things about social media. These are the hashtags that you should use in order to refer to Open Science Fair. So we're expecting to see a very live community exchanging information and tweeting about it. And then we have put up a code of conduct to underline to all attendees some basic rules and expectations from the organizing committee throughout the event. Having said that, I will go on and present today's, so what is happening today. So today we have our keynote speech. There's time to unlock the potential of the digital age. Okay. Then we have a panel on Open Science Future Leading the Way from panelists being members of policy, of public agencies and policy-making bodies that are able to tell us how they view the world of open science from their part and what they're doing. And last, we have a parallel session with 3 workshops. For the workshops, I would like to bring the attention to everyone that they can choose. The workshops will not be broadcasted in this webinar channel, but each workshop has a link on the program of the site. So you can register and be part of this particular workshop of interest. Each workshop has a limit, which we do not foresee to exceed. And again, the workshops will be recorded and will be shared as the plenaries in the YouTube channel and Zenodo. Having that, I don't see any questions. Let me see in the chat if there are any questions. Okay, thank you, Irina, putting all this information forward. So having said that, I would like us to start with our keynote. The keynote is about the open science. Oh, somebody wants to talk? No. Time to unlock the potential of the digital age. And this is a keynote by Dr. Robert Terry. Robert is a senior strategic and project manager. He has in the tropical, let me see if I can say it correctly, in the World Health Organization's special program for research and training in tropical diseases. Seems that Robert has a very, an extensive experience on policy making and also on open science. So he will tell us how he's an advocate of open science. He has started in natural sciences and in agriculture, and he has gone through many positions and placements, from being a researcher to an international research exchange program from Royal Society, in Wellcome Trust being a senior policy advisor. And he has been one of the keynotes from 2007. He has been in the WHO, in the World Health Organization, and he has been one of the lead authors in the 2013 WHO report on research for universal health coverage. Robert will speak to us today about his views on open science and about how to make sure that to take the right steps, or to promote us, to inspire us on what steps to make. So Robert, I think I will stop sharing my screen now, so you can start sharing yours.
Okay, thanks, Natalia. Okay, I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So if you can perhaps just let me know when you can see that. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Good, thank you. I'm just going to move the video out of the way and then I'll get going. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody, depending on where you are in the world. I'm going to talk mainly from my own experience, so many of these comments are my own. They're not official policy from WHO unless I reference that. And I'm really talking about we now need to unlock the potential of the digital age. So let me just get the next one up. Okay, so the first thing I think is, this is my overview of the talk. And if you're like me, you've been to many of these webinars, it can be a bit difficult to concentrate through the whole way. I'll come back to this slide at the end, but essentially this is what I'm going to cover throughout the whole talk. So the key thing here, of course, is the internet. And as most information and knowledge and data has now become digitized, what that really means is that we can distribute information at marginal cost almost instantaneously globally if you have the infrastructure. And that has created a large ecosystem. And so we need to think in system. We need systems thinking to understand how we're going to move forward with open science. It's not enough just to concentrate on one or two areas. And this very nice infographic I have here, I think illustrates that. And the real value, of course, of open science is the connections that we can make. And those connections create new knowledge. But of course, what we've also got now is an absolute tsunami of information, data and publications and other things. And so it's no longer possible for the human eye really to take all this in. And so things have to be machine readable, machine analyzable. And in order to make that happen, we need standards. Again, one of the other things that has to happen in this ecosystem to make it really move forward is that we have to think of ways to minimize the technical, legal, financial, and linguistic barriers that stand in the way. Now, these next three words are principles that are from WHO, and I think they're quite useful if you're thinking about any exercise within the open science space and in other spaces, to be honest. You should always try to achieve these three things. The first is effective. And in this instance, what we're talking about effective means, do we understand the purpose of the sharing and the collaboration? Is everybody clear on their roles and their contributions? And in some instances, that may mean creating a research agenda. And that's extremely important for incentivizing, motivating people to join those causes. Openness and transparency, of course, can be quite nerve-wracking for some people. It may mean that they're exposed, or their private data, they may feel nervous about that being exposed. Whatever has to be done has to be ethical. And then the world is not equal. There is poverty in the world and inequities. And therefore, we need to be certain that if we are encouraging sharing, making more data available, that it's done in ways which doesn't exacerbate those inequities. So the three principles, effective, ethical, and equitable, need to be in our mind. And maybe I'm going further into a bit more of a pipe dream, but we have to start developing a scientific system that's more about collaboration and competition and the creation of global goods. And I think that'll probably mean a complete reset for scientific careers, and particularly new incentive measures will be needed. So I find this taxonomy extremely useful to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about open science. And before I go into the detail of that, I just want to give the reference of where it came from. This was an EU-funded project. I think it finished in 2019. But all the resources that were created are about open science in many different ways, the data, the literature, undertaking science. And they're all available for free on the web. There are training resources, there are videos, there are talks. So I would strongly recommend, particularly if you're new to this area, visiting this resource and having a look at what's there. And the reason that it's important, as I said, we're talking about systems here. And so we're not just talking about the two sort of big areas which people default to, open access publishing perhaps, and the sharing of data, but many of the other areas around how science is undertaken. So open notebooks and those types of things, the policies that surround this, the legal and ethical constraints. And so, as I said, it's very important to think about this as a system. And then how do we actually use this? And what I would say is, for my own organization, I use this by trying to map the what we do within TDR. TDR is a tropical research and training program. We're hosted at WHO, but we're co-sponsored by UNDP, UNICEF, and the World Bank. And these are the activities that we try to do to support our researchers. And the researchers we mainly focus on are from low and middle income countries. So yes, we have an open access policy, open data policy, but we signed up to DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment. We support open peer review, and we support work and methodology around how we continue to define and work in these areas. Now, I said this is a useful schematic for an organization, but I think also we all have our own individual responsibilities. And as an individual, you could also map yourself here. And as you can see, there are some gaps perhaps we need to think about. Like I said, we don't, within TDR yet, have a particularly strong area of work looking at how science is undertaken. And although we work very closely with governments, we're not necessarily at the right level of the organization. Maybe perhaps WHO would be, to work with governments and change government policy and those types of things. So that might be a useful way, particularly in the panel discussion next, how can funding agencies start to demonstrate that they're really working across the open science ecosystem? And why is this so important? I mean, these are just some of my ideas. I'm sure you can add more to them. As I've said, the key thing here is about we create new knowledge that isn't accessible to us in any other way. And that's through the automated sharing and the collaboration that true open science systems will create. And as we've seen, and I make no apologies for that, I will probably use a lot of COVID examples. I mean, it's been at the forefront of the work we've been doing for the last 2 years. And so, yes, it's important that we have interoperability within a discipline, but I think increasingly now we need to work across disciplines, and things need to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, the sort of FAIR principles. So, for example, in tackling COVID, we've not only had to think about understanding the virus, where it is, the different variations, how it plays out in the human body, new therapeutics, new vaccines and others, but also we've got to think about material science and the creation of protective equipment. We've got to think about buildings and how they're ventilated. We have to think about cities and how commuting systems may have to change. So all of these different areas are needed if we're going to tackle something like a pandemic. And I think the other thing that open science creates is transparency. And transparency has a number of real effects. The first one, and I think we've lost this actually in science, is reproducibility. I think it would be extremely difficult to reproduce most of the science as it's reported today. Whereas if it's transparent, if all the data is available, if the supporting software is available, then I think we can start a bit more to understand and have confidence in research findings that are being reported. And that has a knock-on effect, of course, in that is about quality assurance. It improves the quality of everything we do. Also, it means we have the provenance. We know who is contributing to what, how much, and where, and how. And having provenance is going to be very important, because that will help us to work on benefits and how we then look at benefit sharing, and I'll come back to that. Also, I think transparency leads to much better peer review. I think the days of having 2 or 3 confidential and secret peer reviewers where we never see their comments, I think that's past, and we need to move to a much more open system where the peer reviewers are known and the peer reviewers can also be attributed. And all of this, if we can get all of this together, what we'll get is faster results. But of course, open science does create some challenges. I think one of the main ones, and I hear this a lot, particularly from researchers who are in low middle income countries, is that they feel that if they're forced to share without any thought, then that could lead to scooping without any attribution. In a sense, that feels like exploitation. There are some who would say open science is anti-commercial, and it may well challenge certain established practices like the publishing industry as we know. But the way I would describe it is open science is mainly focused in those areas where we're looking at community resources, we're looking at pre-competitive data, and we're looking at ways, information that everyone can use prior to something that may need to be commercialized and moved in another way. There is a concern that having openness leads to the wrong messages being put into the public domain. But I don't have a concern about that. I think we have social media and so many outlets now. I think the idea that the public is unable to read and digest and understand science if it's reported properly is a little bit patronizing. And if I remember back to in history, when the libraries in the United Kingdom, where I'm from, first went public, there was an outcry. The common man will not be able to, I use the language of the day, the common man would not be able to understand this information. It's going to lead to all types of chaos and problems in society. And we still hear these things talked about today. I think COVID and the way that we've all accessed and read and understood information has moved us on from that. So this has given us a bit of an agenda. And again, these are just my ideas, and I'm sure many others will come up through the course of this conference about what are the benefits and how do those benefits play out between individuals, nations, and what are global goods and what are products. And we have to be a little bit clearer how those are defined and how they play out. If we're going to work a little bit more towards what I would consider to be fair benefit sharing. And fair benefit sharing isn't just about commercial sharing of perhaps profits, it's about attribution, reward, incentives. And as I said, we need to be much clearer about what is a community resource, something that's available to everybody and everyone can use and reuse and build on. And that may mean that we have to think about some new business models. And this is going to be extremely important because at the moment we're facing a pandemic. Also, we're facing climate change. These are global issues. We're facing food security issues. These are global issues. And if that's the case, then we need to reduce national sovereignty in the debate and try to increase globalization and the creation of global goods. And I suspect we'll only do that, as I said before, because of some of these negative ideas that we hear. We need to build trust in a more open way of working, and that will only come through the creation of strong governance procedures. So a little bit of history. I wouldn't say this was the start of open science, but certainly from my own experience working at Wellcome, this was very interesting. This was the first publication of the Human Genome Project, the first sort of working draft, if you like. It was about 75% accurate at the time. This is back in March 2000. And it's one of the few occasions, I mean, the then president of the US, the Prime Minister of the UK, I mean, it was an international collaboration. There was China and France and Germany were also involved, but a large part of that work was in the US and the UK. Now, there was quite a lot of guff spoken during that particular launch event, but they also had this statement in their written declaration. And what it was we applaud the decision by scientists working on the Human Genome Project to release raw fundamental information about human DNA sequence and its variants rapidly into the public domain. And we commend other scientists around the world to adopt this policy. And I think what we can see there is they're talking about raw and fundamental information. So sequence is, when you sequence genomic information, it's a series of letters, and that's what we would call the raw information. And then you assemble it using algorithms and computers. It can't be done by humans. And you create the assembled sequence and you go, okay, this is a virus, or this is a mouse virus, or this is something else. And it's drawing that line between what is pre-competitive information and what is subsequently maybe used elsewhere. If we kind of fast forward for whatever that is, plus 20 years, this is what we now have. This is one example. There are many other examples of databases that have been looking at COVID data. This is one that's in the European Bioinformatics Institute. What we see is sequence information, so understanding the different variations in viruses, having a look at hosts. So how does this play out in animals and in humans? How are those sequences expressing themselves in terms of the compounds that they're creating, which are often proteins, how those proteins interact in the chemistry, the biochemistry of the cell? How does the virus enter the cell through imaging? And then how do we put all that together through the written the literature, sort of understanding the data. So what we're seeing here is, and this is probably one of, certainly for the life sciences, I know it's different in different subject matters, how interoperability, mirroring of data, reuse of data in different ways, different tools in different databases to access and reuse the same data is having a tremendous effect. And what has that led to? Well, one of them has been, if you put together these databases, what you can do is start to create targets for new vaccines, targets for new treatment. And then I think one of the things that we've definitely seen in COVID is a tremendous shortening of the timescale to create new vaccines. And that in part was only possible because of the computerization, the sharing of this basic information, the way of doing experiments far, far faster and on huge data sets. Understanding where, if we think again, thinking about COVID-19, understanding the different variants we have, where they are, what's the mix within a region, within a country. At the moment, we only have a certain set of vaccines going, but if we think more about, say, influenza, on an annual basis, the makeup of the vaccines that are being used at the population are varied and changed depending on the variations that exist. And that can only happen through the sharing of that information openly, swiftly, and accurately in databases around the world. My last sort of use case is at the patient level. And this is a piece of work that was put together by a group called ISARAC, which is the International Severe Acute Respiratory Infection Consortium. Hundreds of, I think 150 different groups were on this particular research paper. And you can see from many different locations around the world. And this system brought together patient information, patient records, which are then anonymized and encrypted and brought together in a standard. And that standard was able to be analyzed. And what we then have are these profiles here. So initially, it was extremely difficult to understand exactly how somebody with COVID presents. And what this data shows us is that actually it varies greatly with age. The younger you are, the older you are, middle age, you present the disease in very different ways. And by bringing these data together, we were able to sort of be far more accurate, looking at the sex of somebody and their age, and then the symptoms they have, and being able to diagnose and treat them properly. Now, if you move on to, say, publications, I've only used a couple of examples throughout that large ecosystem I was talking about at the beginning, but I think they express quite a lot. If we go back 2 or 3 years, in the life sciences, the idea of preprints, i.e. publishing your work before it's been peer reviewed, was almost disparaged, not really used, and people were afraid or against the idea. And there was perhaps in 2017 only about 25,000 preprints. Again, fast forward, we now have, well, this was data from about 2 or 3 months ago, more than 300,000 preprints out there, and I'm guessing pretty much all of them are COVID-19 related. So we've changed, we've really shifted because we had to. We have to reorder the publishing process, and we've had to, and that's been driven by COVID. So how have these been used? Well, this is my boss, and one of the things that she was quick to recognize and support was that just putting up PDFs isn't very helpful. They're difficult to read sometimes. You can't search them and you can't make linkages across. So the Europe PubMed Central is the chosen repository of WHO for published literature. And what they've done is they've converted those documents into a proper software language called XML. And XML allows you to do the sorts of things which open science opens, and that is interconnectivity between the data in a paper, the language that's describing those data, where those data is found in databases, and those types of things. If we now think about the use, there is a repository at WHO, it's called IRIS. And I asked the librarian at WHO to do a search. They did this back in March, but it's still, I think, very illustrative. And we looked at, there were about 150 WHO publications at that time. And when we started to look through the references, about 25% of all of those documents were referencing preprints. So in a pandemic, when we were up against the wall, we turned to preprints because we had to, we needed them. One of the other things that's now coming online is something we call living guidelines. And living guidelines are ones that are updated as often as we can and as often as is necessary. And so if I look at, say, the one for therapeutics, it was first published in November 2020. Since then, we've had 6 versions. Now, normally a guideline takes sometimes up to 18 months to generate and then gets updated once or twice in 2 or 3 years' time. What we've had is now we're on our 6th version. And if we actually look at what's being referenced in those documents, we find 44% of the references are preprints, 33% is unpublished data that was just shared with WHO. And therefore, what we've got is less than 25% from traditional published literature. That suggests to me that the traditional way of doing things isn't working when we needed it most. And this is my colleague, Dr. Maria van Kerkhoff. You may have seen her often on the WHO briefings, and she gave us a talk earlier this year at the Health Data Research UK conference. And I'm paraphrasing, there's a couple of things that she's said. The first thing is, and I think anybody who knows anything, publication in a high impact journal does not equal quality. We cannot rely on the impact factor as a proxy for trust or quality assurance. There is an army of people in WHO now having to read and reread the material that's either published in a traditional journal or as a preprint in order to understand its quality and its utility. And again, she repeated what I was saying earlier. It's extremely important that we're getting data from within the fields of chemistry, engineering, architecture, not just medicine. So what does that all mean? Well, I think now we have to have a complete rethink about academic publishing. And I would say we publish first, we open peer review, and I would call even ideally meta peer review, so more than just a handful of people. And a paper has to earn impact. It has to earn its quality as it goes, because the impact factor, it's a toxic indicator. We should just strip it out of the system. It's a little bit like awarding a gold medal to somebody before they've actually run the race. So impact factor needs to go. And as I said before, and I'm going to repeat it, I think the traditional publishing model is no longer fit for purpose. It's too slow. And most worryingly of all, it's no guarantee of quality. And so it seems to me, because we can create research papers that have living links to data, we can link them across different data sets, we can create new knowledge. It seems like we've got these fantastic electric cars, but they're still running along the steam train tracks. So what does that mean? I think the guidelines is making me think that there is no such thing as the version of record. Science is dynamic, it's changing and it's evolving. New ways of publishing means that we can update papers as we need to, and we don't need to have an error appearing in a journal 6 months after the original paper was published. And the concept of the journal, I would say, I think it's dead. It's an extremely wasteful process, and it's open to editorial bias. A colleague of mine calls it clickbait. The editors are just looking for something that's just going to, that's clickbait. I'm being a little bit controversial here, but I think that's okay. But the point of journals, and the reason that some of the higher prestige journals, they are spending huge amounts of resource on rejecting papers. And to me, that makes no sense at all, in order to pick 1 or 2 that then they consider to be the highlights in advance of anybody else reading them. Now, in the new publishing world, what I would suggest is there is a role for a journal, and maybe this is more of a role for the learned societies. And that's about aggregated science. What are the top 10 malaria papers that came out this month? But the papers themselves the pre-competitive stuff, if you like, is available for free to anybody, but the aggregated data could appear in a subscription journal, just if that's one way you wanted to access the material. So all science, all public science should be open access. I think it's so defensible now. And citizens, people who are paying their taxes, should demand this. And preprints should be encouraged, recognized, and rewarded. So this is a recap, just to remind ourselves what we heard at the beginning. Open science requires systems thinking. So we have to think about the system. And all of us, whether we're thinking from an organizational point of view, or whether we're thinking about individuals, should map ourselves and see where our footprint lands on that map. The value, of course, is making new knowledge from these connections. And the time right now, if we're thinking about climate change, food security, pandemics, we can't afford not to work in that global way. The standards that are necessary are because we no longer have to work in the traditional way. Human eye cannot do this. We need machine interoperability in order to access and use and reuse the data that we have. And as I said, we've got to think of ways where we minimize the technical, legal, financial, and linguistic barriers. We have to be effective. What is the agenda here? What are we doing it for? Why are we doing it? To make it completely clear of the benefits that are coming from the openness that we're talking about. And that must be ethical. We cannot disadvantage people's privacy in doing that, and it must be equitable. We can't exacerbate the inequities that exist in the world. And all of that will lead us, I hope, towards a system which is more about rewards for collaboration rather than rewards for competition, and defining global goods like a vaccine. And I think, as I said, that will need a reset in how we advance in science, how we reward scientists, how we measure their outputs. And perhaps we need to bring in more qualitative assessment of what's being done. And we definitely need to remove these very crude and diversive factors, such as the impact factor. So that was just some ideas from me. As I said, they're my ideas. I'd like to just acknowledge a few people who helped me with this short presentation. So Thomas Allen at the WHO Library, Laura Merson from the Infectious Diseases Data Observatory, and Guy Cochran from the EBI. And apologies to Rousseau, but I'll end with this quote. And that is that research is born free, but at the moment it seems everywhere it's in change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I think for us, it was a really nice recap of everything that we're touching upon when we're trying to implement open science. Before, we have two questions from the audience, but before we go that, can I ask, one question that I have is because you're talking from, I would say, the privilege of life sciences community, yep, where everyone seems to, to have it, it's deemed very important in our everyday lives, but we have communities like social sciences, engineering, computer science, all of these that are not, that are supporting, that they are key in our lives, but they're not very well prominent. So, and life sciences, the way you discussed it, the way you presented it, you had, prime ministers and presidents of countries participating actually with their just giving the bravos to this open science, and it's and putting a lot of money. How can the other communities, let's start for example that you started from agriculture, and it's a very important one. How can other communities bring what their interest, their vested interest in open science forward?
Yeah, no, I think I admit I'm best talking about what I know, and I think certainly from agriculture and in the life sciences, the thing I would say is that first principle that I mentioned, which is about effective is reasonably well defined. So if it's something about improving public health or improving the quality of the crops, we know essentially what the end game is. And therefore, I think certainly in the social sciences, in pure mathematics, in history, in a sense, it's for those communities to work a little bit to say, okay, what is our agenda here? And I would strongly support, and I do strongly support, the creation of new knowledge is a value of itself. It doesn't always, and it shouldn't always be forced into creating a product, because that isn't the right way of thinking. And I would say within a lot of the sciences, we've perhaps been pushed into that space too much about describing the impact in ways that perhaps don't always play out properly. So I would say, if you're working in geography or history or the social sciences, you need to think about what's been done in physics, what's been done, say, in the life sciences, and perhaps moving those agenda forward. And the key things are, what are the resources which everybody needs and which can be put together and used and reused in ways that stimulate collaboration but don't prevent people from building and adding to them. So shared libraries, shared access to information, and those types of things. So I mean, there are probably people who are better versed in those areas to answer that question, but that would be my suggestion.
I think, there are many suggestions and the community is trying very hard. It's just that, when you talk about the global community, because I think one of the successes of the life sciences is the globalization of it. This is key. So I think this is food for thought. Now let me go to the questions from two are similar questions from, I don't know if you can see them, is that from Marcus Konkol, if I can pronounce his name correctly, is that you said that you endorse open peer review. What is your opinion regarding revealing reviewer names? How can we avoid that, for example, as especially early career researchers run into conflicts when criticizing senior researchers?
Yeah, I think that, I always sign up to open peer review myself. I think, again, it's one of these changes that I described that lead to chaos. Just because we've always had it confidential doesn't mean to say it should always remain like that. The advantages, if I can just try to describe the advantages, and particularly, so if you do a review for, say, F1000, one of these open platforms, what we're now seeing is that the reviews themselves are also citable. So again, it could be another output. And this is what I was saying about a reset for careers. At the moment, a lot of us do peer review in the margins of our work in our own time, and they aren't necessarily recognized or rewarded. So Publons is an example where people are getting some merit for undertaking peer review. My view is, again, if we move to a system where there are greater numbers of people peer reviewing, then the influence of a single individual is diluted. So there shouldn't be this fear of somebody, perhaps even a junior researcher, spotting a flaw or a complication in a preprint that they need to spot. But if they're one voice amongst a number, then they don't necessarily get all the attention. But I would say the advantages of openness, and I think the improved quality. See, now the argument that was given to me 10, 15 years ago was, oh, well, if it's in confidence, people will speak their mind more freely. And I would say, well, if it's open, then we can actually see what they're saying, and we can judge for ourselves if it's correct or not. The problems we've had with closed peer reviews, we end up with situations where papers have been published and it's taken many, many years to get them retracted. The one I can think of is the one that falsely made claims about links between autism and triple MR vaccine in a very high prestige journal. We all know this story. It was peer reviewed by two secret peer reviewers that we've never known their names. And it took 10 years to get retracted, and it remains the touchstone for the anti-vax community right now. So there is a real danger in that. If those papers had appeared, I think, first as a preprint and had been able to be peer reviewed by many, I suspect it would have never lived a much longer life. So I recognize the concerns for young researchers, perhaps, criticizing those who may have a higher reputation, but I think they should be brave. And if it's open and transparent, then they should be able to defend their observations. And I think that's, that is at heart, that is science. It's about criticism and being brave and confident when you have a criticism that you're able to make it and you're able to back it up with evidence. So.
Exactly. So I think the word I would like to comment here is not just brave. I think it's I know it's being young what it means, but being a scientist means that this braveness comes by being a scientist. You have to be you have to be there and support it. So again, to Marcus, it's a whole system change, and it's a culture change. So this is these things will always be there, but if the majority abides to this culture change, I think we're going to lessen the problems by being brave, and I would say by being a scientist is we can take it forward. Now I will skip Francoise because I will come to Francoise Genova question at the end, because this is I had the same question when you said patronizing for public. Is to Gabriella. So she says an interesting idea to abandon journals, but what would replace a peer review process to ensure the quality? I know that you refer to that the quality doesn't necessarily mean that, but it seems that the researchers, they need this peer kind of acknowledgement, of reviewing. I mean, I don't know what it is, but can you comment on that, Gabriella?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, there are some living examples out there. I mean, the one that I work with a lot is the Faculty of 1000, and they have a number of what they call these publishing platforms. And so the way that it works is that you present your paper. And as we know, papers have a certain format that they need to follow in terms of a description of the context and the rationale for the research protocol, a description of the kind of methodology, the results, and then a discussion about what those results mean. And broadly speaking, in different scientific areas, those formats are followed. So if something is reported properly scientifically, then it can be published. And then the peer review happens afterwards. The interesting thing about the F1000 model and other open models is the peer review appears alongside the paper. When there's been two agreements, the peer reviewers have resolved any of the issues that they've said, and so the two of them say, yep, this should be published. Those papers are then indexed in PubMed. And PubMed is the standard sort of repository, if you like, for medicine and the life sciences. And I think that system gives you the quality assurance. You not only see the published research paper, you see the concerns that were raised or the issues that were raised by the peer reviewers. You can see how they were responded to, and you can see the changes that were subsequently made. And as I said, to me, that transparency is where we get quality from. At the moment, we have to rely on confidentiality and secrecy, and I think that leads to mistakes, either unwittingly or maybe even deliberately, which are dangerous. Whereas if we can get to openness and transparency ensures quality.
Okay, so I'm reading, so I think, now we have a live discussion. So I'm trying to moderate the questions. 3 minutes before we go to Francois, I'm going to leave you at the end, questions. Is that we think about, the comments here, if I read them correctly, is that, that they agree, open science, but when, about secrecy and enterprises. So how can you manage the industrial secrecy? For example, data management plans, that the public funders require. That how can you, how can you manage your secrecy? Because of course IPR is behind it. But before you answer to that, I think, I would like to answer to Claudia, is that it seems that, when you're, I think, that perhaps there is the wrong interpretation, because doing a data management plan, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that you publish the data or that you publish the plan. So it can be, you know, as long as you have it. The data management plan is not about the publishing of data. It's not about publishing of your work, but it's about, you know, making sure that whatever you have is curated, is stored, and it's archived. So this is okay. Right. So this is clear. Then nonprofit. Blah, blah. Okay. So if we go to Radovan Branda, so you said that each paper should earn its reward, its gold medal. How many gold medals are there in a particular journals? I am pro for open science, open access. However, due to the number of scientists in the world and their manuscripts, who would decide what papers are for publishing or not? Peer review can handle it, or now handles it with great difficulties. Review by many is okay until it becomes a platform for improved criticism, which is a good comment, I think, because think about, you know, Robert, is the last number that I had seen from 2015 for only English, in English language, we had 2.5 million scientific papers every year. So this is, I think, you know, the volume is a problem. So, you know, how do we respond to Radovan?
Okay, so I think there were two questions there. One was around IP and commercialization, and the other one was around how we handle the, as I said, the tsunami of information that's coming our way. I think on the IP one, what I would say, well, there's a couple of things there. The first one is, particularly in the life sciences, some will argue that perhaps the sort of commercial approach to the life in general, which is based on consumption and growth, is not really a sustainable system for how we run the planet anyway. And if we're going to work to combat climate change, then we need to start thinking about how we create recycling economies. Now, as that plays out within the life sciences, which is what I know most, the thing I come back to is we're not talking about open science is just a free-for-all, unmanaged and everything open. It is about very careful consideration about drawing the line as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So what is pre-competitive information? So if I go back to my example in genomics, so understanding the genetic makeup of beings, we were very clear early on that the raw sequence, the series of letters, ACTG, and how they are assembled, everybody should know. But once you start building on that, and perhaps as we have seen, you can now reverse engineer from a viral sequence to create a vaccine, there may well be the necessity to commercialize that. Okay, but what we're saying is open science doesn't answer every single question, but that we have to maximize the amount of information that's available more broadly. An example from another sort of area is if we look at telephones. So the software that was created to create telephone apps, that software is open source software. Now, if it was proprietary, I don't think we'd have as many apps as we have on the telephone systems that we use today. But by making that software open and available to all, it's created a new industry for creating apps that are used on telephones. And so it's that kind of example whereby the openness has its greatest effect, and it comes back to those principles I was mentioning about, is being clear about the purpose, and then we know why we're sharing and the purpose of sharing. Okay. On the peer review question, and the first thing we have to realize is, everyone keeps saying, oh, there's too many research papers being published. Well, the research is being done. And as I said, for many areas, not just the life sciences, it's funded by taxpayers' money. So I would prefer that it was available than not. I can't see the advantage of funding science or social science history and then it not being available to people. That also makes no sense. The way that I would see it working is that we would allow people to publish first. And there are certainly, within physics and within life sciences, we have a number of these publishing platforms, but they still have a minimum standard that the information has to be packaged in recognizable ways. So as I said, within the life sciences, there's usually a template that would describe a scientific outcome in ways that describe the context and the methods and the data, and then a discussion, right? If that passes a certain level, which can be done, then it can be published first. Then the peer review comes. Now, at the moment, that's still a relatively well-managed system. We invite people to come, they give their comments, they're also published alongside. As I think that process becomes more well-known, and as I said, if we re-engineer how scientific careers are organized and managed, it may well be an expectation, particularly amongst those who are working in the public sector, that they have to do a certain amount of peer review a year, and that's rewarded as part of their sort of career structure. So publish first, then peer review, and then I think there is a whole market for interpretation after something is published. So saying these papers that were published on malaria in the last month, these are the top 10, these seem to be the most significant. Now, what it means is we're doing that in an open system. So we can maybe disagree with the choices. We disagree with which films get given Oscars, but at least we've seen the film before the Oscars are awarded. Right now, if you publish in a prestige journal like Nature or Science or New England Journal or Lancet, you're given the Oscar before anyone else has read your paper. And that makes no sense to me whatsoever.
I think that's a good, that's a good, what's the word? It's not parable, but it's a similarity.
Analogy
now,
or something, yeah.
Analogy, exactly. Okay. Now, to Francois' question, I will take 4 minutes from the panel because we can have 4 minutes at the break. Hopefully the panelists will understand. So Francois' question is about, about the comment about transparency and the difficulty of making it efficient. So we see at least in some countries that sharing a number of proper information from reliable sources, such as about COVID, is not enough to overcome the impact of the huge number of fake information, which are circulating very fast and believed by many people. So any thoughts?
Yeah, no, it is a real issue. What I think we've now come to call the infodemic. The difficulty, of course, these days is that it doesn't really matter whether something is published in a journal or published online. There are too many routes to getting things into the public domain anyway. So we have to learn how to manage that type of information. As I said, certainly within the life sciences, we have a structure for understanding how something is reported. And if it's reported without the data to back it up, then I think it becomes clear that those papers can then be discarded or they can be removed from the system. That will take a bit of time to become normal. But the flip side is what we're getting. And early on in COVID, there were a couple of papers, one appeared in Lancet, one appeared in New England Journal, making false claims about hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID. And the peer reviewers, we now understand, never even asked to see the data, and the data didn't actually exist in the way that it was reported in the paper. So the current closed system wasn't working very well. They very quickly corrected that now. But I think as we move forward, we are going to have to adjust to this a better system of understanding and making our own judgments on things. And if they're reported in the right way, if the references are there, if the data is there, if the transparency is true and genuine, then I think it's much, much harder for people to make claims that aren't backed up by evidence. And they have to be, if they're evidence-based, then the evidence has to be seen. And I think that's really the issue.
Okay. Well, I think this is with this remark we're closing. So my take from the questions here is that many of the things, even though the open science community has been working for a long time, many of the things are not clear to the people. Like open peer review, what does it mean? What are the processes? What does it entail? So this is something like a take-home message to see how to take it forward. So now, Thank you, Robert. Now moving to the panel, but I would like to ask Robert to stay with us because, you know, we have a panel of policy advisors or policy officers or policy makers. I don't know how you call you, but this is, and as Robert has been a policy officer for a long time, I think his help in moderating this panel would be great. I would like to, you know, to provide the apologies for Heather Joseph that she was going to moderate this panel, but she has a severe case of strep throat, and her voice is not helping her moderate. So I will take over. And Robert, thank you for for staying with us. So let me see. So so let me see who we have here. So we have Erin. Okay, let me see who I can see. We have Erin. I can see Erin on Erin McKernan, if I pronounce it well, on the screen. Maren Decol, okay. And then, of course, Marcel Crosas, but I'm missing Mrs. Echeverry, Eisen Echeverry. Is she around? Don't think so, but we can start because time is running. So let me introduce the people who are here. Hopefully, because it's Mrs. Echeverry. She's in Chile, so the time difference may be an issue. Hopefully, it was not, but who knows? Let me start with Erin, just to give some introduction. Erin McKernan is a community manager at Open Research Funders Group. Erin, you will tell us more about the group. And your role is to see how this group of funders, which I understand are charity funders, is to better understand the tools and resources to develop, launch, and oversee open policies or open science policies. You have a background, Erin has a background in physics, biomedical physics, in the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She has been, I think you are now based in Mexico, but you have been before in Canada and the US. Did I get this right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Then we have Maran Dacos, who's a long, an old, no, not an old, a long time advocate of open science, a very, active advocate. And now Maran is the National Open Science Policy at the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation in France. So you are an advisor to the Director General. Maran has been famous, at least in the European circles, because he has been not only an advocate, but also an implementer of open science and open access tools and services in CNRS. So Open Edition, I think it's your creation. And he's also involved in the repository in Halle, if I get this right. Then Marcel is you have to tell us more, Marcel, about that. But your new position, you are the Secretary of Open Government at the Generalitat de Catalunya, if I can pronounce this well. So we all know Marcel because she has been an active member of the open science community from the time in Harvard. So Marcel is a graduate in physics from Barcelona, astrophysics in Rice University, and then spent a lot of time in Harvard, where she became co-directed the Dataverse project. So we know the Dataverse service that we are setting up in universities. And she has been, of course, a co-author of the Fair Data Principle. So Marcel brings us the view from being an active member of the community, both Marcel and Maran, to how it is to become and do policy and shape policy and implement policy from the governmental aspect. Oh, and Mrs. Echeverry is now here. So Eisen, I can call you Eisen. Thank you for joining.
Hello, Natalia. So sorry for the delay. It was
Don't
wrongly
worry.
put in my agenda and I was waiting a couple of hours still. So I'm sorry.
Okay. First of all, thank you for joining. You know, we know it's a hard, you know, what time is it in Chile now?
The beginning of the morning, it's 10 a.m. So
okay, so it's not that early. Okay, so just to give a few pointers of you. So you are the national director of the current National Research and Development Agency in Chile. So that means that you are a funder and implementer of infrastructure, the way I understand it. So from reading your short bio is that you are a lawyer from the University of Chile and you have a master's from the University of San Francisco. You have been working, I can see it was impressive, 15 years coordinated, led public and private teams, but you have also before worked in big companies, tech companies. So that means that it gives you a very good background on what it is between the commercial and non-commercial. So let me start. Okay, let me start with Erin because I saw Erin first in the screen. Okay, what we have agreed is that each of you will give us a 5-minute presentation or talk. Let us know if you want to present something of what you're doing, on practical issues of open science, because this panel is not about, talking about policies, because we all know, that we need policies, we need to implement, but what we would like to know, to get out of this panel is what are concretely what you are doing, what are the challenges, but also what are the opportunities, because it's tiring always to talk about challenges. What we would like to hear about here is opportunities, and then the next round of questions is what is missing in order to get this this globalization of open science. And in practical terms, again, we're talking about practice here. So how can we get it in practice? So Erin, your 5 minutes.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great, and I will just share my screen if that's all right.
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's see, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Great. All right, so yeah, as Natalia mentioned, I'm here as the community manager for the Open Research Funders Group. And this is a group of 22 philanthropic organizations. I'm coming at this from a little bit of a different perspective because I think other folks are kind of from the public funder side. We're from the private funder side. And you can see the 22 organizations represented here. So our members range from small funders to large funders. They also span kind of the entirety of the disciplinary spectrum. So we have folks funding life sciences, biomedical research, physical sciences, and even social sciences and humanities like cultural preservation projects or even criminal justice reform. So lots of heterogeneity in the group, but one thing that really spans the whole group is this belief that open research is the way to go. And I would say even more broadly, open scholarship, because we do have a few members that support things like open education and open innovation. A few numbers. So we do have 22 members, as I mentioned, and with those members, we have a combined assets of around $250 billion and an annual grant making of excess of 10 billion. So that really is kind of a tremendous market power and a huge potential for those organizations to influence the research ecosystem. So that means they have a voice, they often have seats at the table in these conversations about research funding. They have a power to influence what researchers think and how they practice, a power to convene multiple stakeholders. But that market power also means responsibility, especially since these are philanthropic organizations. Their missions are focused on public good. So we have to ask those questions, how can we have the most impact? And again, our members really believe that the way to have the most impact is to support open research. And that might be through policy, that might be through funding projects in the open research ecosystem. and also through positive signaling. So saying publicly that this is something that we support as organizations. So what I do a lot with the OFG is help build this community. But I think something that's really important to emphasize here is that we're not looking to create homogeneity. We're not looking to have these members come in and sign on to a one-size-fits-all policy. We don't believe that that's the way to go. We really believe that we want to encourage our members, not impose on them certain actions. And we really want to meet funders where they are on open, right? This, especially the policy space, is kind of a whole spectrum. We want those folks to be able to come in where they're comfortable, start off where they're comfortable, and then from there we can take incremental steps to keep improving on policy. But again, very much the idea of having them come in, encouraging them, and building the community that way. So there's a few things that we think are very important for building this community. Building trust, having those safe spaces where they can have very frank conversations about the challenges, about their concerns, about successes and failures in the policy space. So we really try to facilitate those conversations, provide a space for them to learn from each other. And then also a little bit of strength in numbers, right? So they can go ahead and say, hey, we're not the only ones doing this, we're moving together as a group. And I think it's really important, again, to say that these are kind of the pillars. That community won't come just from putting funders in the same room and saying we have a coalition. We really have to work on building these things. And then in building these internal things like trust and those safe spaces, that also allows us to then create, identify some common concerns, some common issues, some common values, and then move forward potentially externally. So the other thing we try to do is create what we're calling kind of mutually reinforcing vectors. So if we have the researcher or the grantee in the center here, they're getting lots of mixed messages right now from funders, from publishers, from peers. And what we would like to do is align those messages and have those arrows all pointing in the same direction, so that researchers are really getting the same information, the same messages from everybody. So we have a few initiatives with the National Academies of Sciences on aligning incentives, other initiatives where we try to take that trust that we've built, that community that we've built, and then go out and speak to different stakeholders and really try to align things in the open science space. So I think I'll stop there, and then we can go forward with more questions as we go on.
Okay, so just a question, is this 250 billion, is it an annual number?
Sorry?
That's
the combined, 250 billion is the combined assets, and then 10 billion in annual grant giving. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erin. I think, I got some messages from you. Maren, how about you going second?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I will share my screen. If it's okay, then you will be able to see it. So I will present in a few minutes French open science policy. So as you said, Natalia, I was, before joining the Ministry of Research, I was a creator of platforms that became European platforms like Open Edition. And I tried to implement, when I was asked to join the Ministry of Research, I tried to implement the best practices coming from my experience on a political level. So the main leverage that we have is the law. And before coming to the ministry, there was the decision made by the French Republic creating the Digital Republic Law, making mandatory all research, publicly researched funded data. So the research data are by the law mandatory open since 2016. This is a strong commitment from the ministry, from the state in France. Then when I arrived in 2017, I proposed to write down and engage France into the first National Open Science Plan, which was announced in 2018 by Frédéric Vidal, the Minister of Higher Education, Research and Innovation. And the impact of this plan has been coming from 41% of open access publications in France to 56%. So of course it's not enough yet, but in 3 years we made an impressive move, and we created the French Open Science Committee, which is a body with all the universities and research performing organizations willing to coordinate the French level. And we created something which is very important for us, which is a National Open Science Fund, which is a fund with money, several millions, aiming to fund initiatives that we think are important for us. And this summer, we published the second National Open Science Plan, again by the Minister of Higher Education, Frédéric Vidal. This new plan has an ambition of generalizing open science in France. It's twice the size of the first one, so there are more than 70 actions, and the budget has been tripled. So open science budget has been tripled from 5 million a year to 15 million a year. In particular, I will focus on some decisions that we made. Concerning publications, we will support economic models of open access publishing without publication fees, so meaning without APCs. So we call it diamond model. We also decided to promote multilingualism and publications for all our publications. So when we publish in French, we want them to be translated into English or Spanish. And when we publish in English, we need to translate them into French because the citizens need, and especially in health research, in COVID-19 research, they need to be able to read French research into French. For data, we have decided to create a centralized national platform for research data called Recherche Data Gouv, Research Data Gouv. And concerning the transformations, there is a need of transformation. We need to develop and value open science skills at all levels of the curriculum and academic curriculum. And we also, concerning the transformation, need to value open science and the diversity of scientific predictions in the evaluation of researchers, projects, and research institutions, meaning that we are close to the DORA manifesto, and now we need to implement it. That's not easy. And then we have also decided to rely more on research, what we can call also meta research, to overcome the obstacles that are in front of us. If it was easy, we would know, and then open science would be already done. So we need to ask people doing research on research more feedback. And to do that, we are creating an open science lab. And we are trying to implement this idea also in the G7 Open Science Work Group, with a specific group dedicated to this question, research on research. So one of our main obstacles is the concentration of a publishing system. And so we want to promote bibliodiversity, what we call bibliodiversity. To help that, we have created the National Open Science Fund, and what we fund only initiatives that rely on the principles of open scholarly infrastructures, which are called POSI. So it's an international alignment on the international principles applied at national level. And then I would like to end my presentation with the next steps. Maybe you know that there is a French presidency of the European Union next year for 6 months. Each country inside the European Union is the president. Now it's the Slovenian one, and next year it will be the French presidency of the European Union. So we will organize an event in Paris, 4th and 5th of February 2022 at the Academy of Science, European Open Science Conference, and you are all invited to this event. We will address 4 main subjects: evolving research evaluation to enable the development of open science, developing transparency in Earth research, which is not 100% satisfaction. And we will discuss about the future of scientific publishing, and we will also discuss about the question of code and research software, which is underestimated by now. We intend to propose in Paris a major open science initiative concerning evaluation, and you are again invited to Paris. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, and it's always nice to see, you know, such initiatives and, you know, such passion. So let me go to Marcel now. So Marcel, you know, your turn in telling us, you know, about Catalonia, and you know what you perceive, and you know how things are in your new environment.
Thank you, Natalia. Do you hear me okay, first of all?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, and I know that we know each other from a long time, but me coming from another perspective. So I will be talking now from the perspective of this new position as the Secretary of Open Government in the government of Catalonia. Of course, I just started this recently in the last month. So I will talk a little bit about what has been done, but also some of the ideas of what we want to do. Okay, so I'll share my screen too,
Okay.
and see if that. Is it okay or no?
Yes. Yes, it's fine.
You see it fine?
You can see it. Yes.
So yeah, what I will introduce a little bit what is open government and how I see it, I associate it to open science. There is a lot of open science initiatives in Catalonia, in general in Spain, and that follow the European open science initiatives too. But the open government is in another department within the Catalan government. But as open science, as for example, the recent report or digital toolkit note that Alan Peck from OECD has published, it says that it's in the interest of enhancing transparency, collaboration, and fostering innovation. And the three main aspects of open science are open access, open research data, and open collaboration. Well, that's one definition. It's hard to find a very common definition. But similarly to this message or these components of open science, open government brings the open data and also the transparency, civic participation, or citizens, or civic engagement, public integrity, accountability, and collaboration towards enhancing democratic quality. So if you think of for open science, what we want is a better research, better science by being more transparent. We're doing something similar for within open government, thinking how we improve democracy by being more transparent and using some of the same tools that open science would use. And what I want to bring you at the end of this very short presentation is how we could be stronger by bringing those two together. So, but first, some of the initiatives and the work efforts that have been done in Catalonia with respect to open science. So there was an open science strategy plan that was approved a couple of years ago, and it's similar to what Marine has described for France, how that, well, first it was a strategy and it turned into law. The plan for this strategy is for the next year to become a law science of Catalonia, a science law of Catalonia. But it's similar to what other countries like in the Netherlands, Finland, Ireland, Norway, and so have done. And what it brings is first services and strategy and just platforms and tools that will help reduce the efforts to comply with European open science requirements. It also helps increase the visibility of Catalan research. And there are plans also for providing more formal training to PhD students on open science. So not just in the, in addition to the PhD on their own subject matter, right, would be an additional training and education in open science. And there is, it comes with a strong commitment of open access from the universities. In all those plans, as I'll be saying, I'll repeat maybe a couple of times, it's important that commitment not only from the government side, but from the research institutions and the universities, right? It comes together. And of course, with that, the research institutions and universities need to bring that commitment to the researchers themselves too. So as part of this strategy plan for open science, Catalonia has created the Catalan Open Research Area, and there are 3 components as of now. So under this umbrella of the CORA, or this open research area. So one component is a portal, a research portal, where there is information about each university and research organization with university data, but also the plan is to grow an experts network, place to find who's working on what and how they connect. There is also a research data repository, and this is based on, well, it started or deployed, I believe, about a year or so ago, and it's based on the database platform that is also, Natalia said, I had worked on it for quite some time, but well, the universities in Catalonia, like other universities in Europe, in other places in the world, have taken the platform to share the research data from, in this case, with a commitment from 10 universities. And it's growing, and with some data sets already published there since the last year or so. And then there is also some services that are around research data management, and includes the DMP tool, as it was mentioned earlier, but also the FAIR principles and a way to accompany researchers on how to follow those principles and how to work, well, what to know and about research data management in order to just make the data as accessible or reusable as possible. So then how are we thinking of bringing those efforts together? I think that's, well, an idea. Maybe it hasn't been I don't know if it's been discussed under this this event, but or in previous events. But it just well, open science, open government has been separate things. Now that at least with the perspective of having been in both and seeing these similarities, they could win a lot of, well, it would have a lot of potential and could add a lot of strengths if we try to combine data that we're talking about, government data, research data from the data from the universities, and industry data, right, together, and make it as open as possible, as also been said before, and as restricted as needed. And with that, following the data governance strategies or plans and policies, building the standards so that the repositories from either industry research data, research repositories or research organization data spaces or portals that are specific of a scientific discipline or domain specific, could interoperate with the more general research data repositories that universities provide for open science, right, for the data associated with the publications. And also they could interoperate with government repositories, open data portals, and also with the regional portals that provide information about each various territories, and with that create a federation of repositories that with discovery services, so that the data can be further integrated and reused. And for those things, we need still some the best models for data sharing across these sectors or these groups, and be able to also empower others to reuse those data. And then another component of bringing together open science and open government could be the making science a more collaborative enterprise. Well, science by itself is a collaborative enterprise, but maybe making it closer to society. So making more collaborative with society. And how could we do this? So as part of open government, there is civic participation is a big component of it. So we could bring up those individuals in the conversations about when there is a scientific solutions, but we need to bring them then to implement it regionally, nationally. How do we do that? What is the best way that it will impact in a positive way to society? How is society aware of how it could be implemented? So bringing them into the picture with this participation, also helping society be well informed. We talked briefly also earlier about the misconceptions or the misinformation that can come with either from some of the publications that then were retracted, or simply from interpreting data or scientific results by non-experts in a way that then misleads the public. So how can we help with so that's we bring science and open science, the tools to inform society in an easy language, in an easy way of interpreting those data and tools, because just making that data more open doesn't necessarily translate to everybody be better informed if they don't know how to interpret it and they have the expertise to help them interpret. And then the other thing is involving the individuals also with either citizen science or with using or being empowered to use the data and also to share the data, so have more control over that. And then as a final component is again, I repeat, this commitment from government, but also from research institutions and universities, from the Generalitat de Catalunya. One of the things that will go in place as a result of the strategy plan for open science is the Llei de Ciència de Catalunya, or the law of science of Catalonia, similar to the one that Marin mentioned from France.
So what I see, Marcel, so what I see, Marcel, here, because this is something that I will want to introduce in the discussion, is I see that this open because the open government movement is something that all the governments in Europe, and I think many in the world are moving. So I see that this is as an opportunity, not as a challenge. Well, it is a challenge, but I see that as an opportunity on getting on this wagon of the open government and bring open science. So this is I'm keeping this for a discussion. So now, Eisen, your views on and what you are doing in Chile, or what I see something that is on the screen that is not. Okay.
Let me see if I can share my screen.
Okay.
I think Mercedes.
I see some.
Okay.
Marcel. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, I need to unshare the.
That's okay. So maybe while we do that, and before I share my screen, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It is exciting for us Chileans to be part of this conference, because we are in the process of creating our open data and open science strategy. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
So we have gone through an institutional big change in Chile during the last 2 years. We created a Ministry for Science, Technology, Innovation, and Knowledge. It started operating the 1st of January of 2020. And with the ministry, we transformed our funding agency from CONICYT, the old agency, into the new one, ANID, which is the one I'm the director for. And one of our strategic pillars in creating this new institution, it's precisely open science. So what I'm going to show you is the process we have gone through during the last 2 years. I'm going to be brief, I promise. So our starting point was not zero, and we had a history of initiatives and platforms and tools that were created to promote open science. We had the first Latin American repository. We have Data Ciencia, which is a portal that shows the results of our scientific research, and basically different pieces that were built over the years, but that lacked a common story and a common governance that could make them grow and really turn into an open science policy. And then also as a starting point, we have 2 principles. One is that knowledge finance with public funds must be publicly accessible, which is something that it's incorporated in the law that creates the minister, but it's also something that we deeply believe in this agency. And also we needed to ensure minimum standards of transparency and accountability. Since we're creating a new agency, everything that had to do with accountability and showing results was part of our initial mandate, and it was something that we needed to strengthen during the installation of the new agency. So in order to achieve this, basically these 2 principles, we started by involving the entire community. During 2020, we opened a public consultation on a first draft for a policy for open access that included both scientific information and scientific data. We had a very large participation, I would say, even though there's not much culture on open science in the country. We had almost 1,000 researchers and members of the community that responded to this policy, which is, because of the size of our community, is a fairly representative number. The public consultation basically showed a draft, and we asked our community what were their concerns, the challenges, and the benefits that they could see if we were to implement the policy. The result of that was also published, and the results were encouraging in the sense that we had an alignment of purposes. So if we looked at the core of the policy, there was agreement among the community, and the challenges or the questions or the concerns came from the implementation process and the capacities that we had in the country to actually implement a policy, an open science policy. So in order to address those challenges, we decided to strengthen those local capacities, and we created a fund for open science. That was the first fund that we have created so far. It is now open, and we are receiving the proposals, and we're going to evaluate them, and the results are going to be shown probably by the end of October. But what is interesting is that it's the first time we really worked with the entire community in identifying what those structural needs were, and the fund covers not only infrastructure that we know it's needed, but also creating capacities, cultural change, and creating open data policies within our universities also, which is something that we saw were not existent, or very few of them had one. And then finally, and this is the step where we are at now, we decided to create a collaborative governance, which is something that we didn't have. All the main pieces of the puzzle that were installed during the last 10 to 20 years were pieces that were lacking this governance, and they were basically driven by the agency without a strong participation of the entire community. So we decided to create this governance that includes all the universities in the country, that has a body of governance, of course, that has a set of tools, which are the journals, the repositories that we have as an agency, but also the universities have, the access policies, financial support through these funds and others. But I would say the most important is that it identifies as beneficiaries of all this structure, not only the scientific community, the government and the academia, but also the industry and all the citizens, right? Because we're trying to really push an agenda and really push a policy that it's not only focused on open science, but on open knowledge as a whole, which is something that we want to install in the country as a whole. And I believe this is my last slide. Basically, from where we were 2 years ago, where we had strong bones to create something and the pieces to create something, what we're trying to achieve is to create a national representation and to have the entire community involved in the process of not only creating, but most importantly, implementing an open science policy. We want to strengthen this collaborative work and national coordination, which is something that we have achieved so far. We're super excited because we have all the universities in the country signed the agreement and they're part of this governance, which is a huge milestone. We want to, from there, start moving to an alternative model of access to information resources that it's more diverse than what we have now. We want to strengthen the role of the university libraries that are basically I don't know how to say it. I forgot the word. Basically, they're the pillar to where we are building the entire implementing process. We want to reduce our dependence on the supply of publishers, which are where most of our funds go now, and we want to again diversify the sources for information. And then finally, we want to implement an open access policy that it covers scientific data and scientific information, but we want to do it through a construction process that involves the entire community. We believe that is a way that we can achieve appropriation, right? We'll have our research community really buying into this and implementing it and seeing the benefits that it has for the science they are creating. So that has been our path over the last 2 years, full of challenges and questions, but so far with good results. We hope for more.
Okay, I think this is impressive, especially for me that I'm coming from a small country where we are trying from Greece, where we're trying to to put such a order into the chaos. So can I ask, from what I see and from what I know, is that also in France, Marianne, the model that you initiated, I've seen it and you've presented it a few times, is also a community-based community governance, which is the same, seems to be the same model that Chile is addressing or is following. Can I ask the question is that, what I see is that it's a community governance, but it's pushed top down. Is there any way when there is no commitment or no willingness from a funding body, funding organization, to take this forward, that communities like a national community of, rectors or of everyone involved to self-organize, because here we're talking about communities, and perhaps this also may refer to to Marcin and Nerin, because you are dealing with communities. But maybe, Marianne, you may start the discussion. I'm interested because, in many countries, it's not happening in Europe and around the world.
Yes, I don't know exactly what kind of communities you refer to. So is it the researchers communities, or is it the institutional universities and funding agencies communities, which is not the same thing? In France, we try to address both levels. So we have a governance with a national open science governance, which is called the Open Science Committee, which is very close to what I have understood from Chile. And we try to have top to bottom and bottom to top processes. So we have a grant of 300 people involved in the forum. So it's individuals. And then working groups, so representing organizations, and then steering committees. So both of them are able to have initiative and to ask questions to the other layers of the policies. So we cannot force people. In fact, you can enforce in the law mandates, and without any commitment, without any willingness, without any understanding of what you are trying to achieve, nobody will follow. So the law is in fact inefficient. It's useful to have it, but it's useless to have it only. It's necessary, but not sufficient. So the best option, the main obstacle is a lack of data sharing culture or of research sharing culture in the community in some research community, in some disciplines. And so we cannot force them without proving that they are it's beneficial for them. You can make everything mandatory, you will fail if you are not accompanying it with different policies and proofs that it's beneficial for the researcher inside the research competition. So it's not that easy. We show that we have a plan and so on, but there is a diversity of communities. Some communities are not willing to share the data, and the plan doesn't change anything in that if we consider the plan itself is sufficient.
Okay, so
if I may
go ahead.
add something to what Maha just said. It's not only proving to the community that this is beneficial for them, but it also has to be easy because it's a lot of work. So if it becomes layers and layers of bureaucracy in order to comply with something that you make mandatory in your grants, then nobody's going to abide by that. So you need to make it easy and beneficial, which is super hard to do in our experience.
Yes.
I mean,
I just want to add that is part of what the strategy, one of the main missions of the strategy here at DAN was to see in what way it could facilitate this compliance, right? To provide the services and the help to make it happen. But I do think that even if the government needs to be committed and needs to be part of it. A lot of the cases, what we see is that it has come initially from the universities, the research organizations to start first pushing it and commit themselves to do it. And then it becomes a lot easier to follow a plan or policy that is enforced by the government.
So I mean, probably I want to ask also Erin and then Robert, jump in if you want to ask a question or respond to a question. Is that so what Eisen is saying is that probably services, they should come together or before the policies or this pushing, because we want to make it easy. And me being an engineering and practical person, I always said that, because being in open air for 10 years now, it's I see in many countries we're advocating for open science and open access, and they're lacking a lot of infrastructure. And the researchers, I think they're fighting back because others like Google, like all these big techs, they're making it easy for them, and we're making it more difficult. So going back now to, for example, to the charities and to the funders, the private funders, how do they see this part of the infrastructure? I mean, is there a common approach to this, or do they rely on public money and public infrastructure for this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think I'd be hesitant to kind of say that all the philanthropies are under one umbrella, they're all thinking the same way about this. I think there is a lot of heterogeneity, but we definitely do have funders that are focused on not just the policy end of supporting open research, but the actual nuts and bolts of how do we make this easier by investing in the open research ecosystem. So can we invest in the development of tools that actually make sharing, or Rob was talking about preprints, can we provide support for those platforms? Can we build infrastructure. But one of the things that I think is an important conversation is when we're putting money into that space, are we also ensuring that those tools that we're funding are going to be open source, openly available, led by communities? Because I think that is a huge. We don't want to just pour money into tools that are then going to be again locked down or not supported by the community. So that's something that I think our members are definitely thinking about, is how can we support open infrastructure, but how can we do it in a way that is beneficial to the ecosystem, and that is taking the views of the researcher community and things like that into consideration. The other thing I wanted to mention on the end of making things easier, that's also something that on the funder side we think about. How can we make it easier for funders to implement policies? Because it's not trivial, right? So we do think a lot about, can we provide template language? Can we provide examples? Can we provide success stories from other funders that make it easier for the funders themselves, for the philanthropies, to actually move forward and implement policy? So.
Okay, so it's good here. Robert, do you have any question, or can I go on with the questions or answers?
Well, not really a question. It's a comment, just literally on what Erin just said, actually. And I think it's something that's really important, and that is to share good practice where it exists. I think it was in 2003 or something when I was at Wellcome, we wrote the first data sharing policy. But I've not yet seen it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've not yet seen Wellcome publish the data management and sharing plans that are required under that funding. And I think something like that helps. And as you say, it's let's get practical. Let's do something that is achievable. So sharing those good practice things, I strongly support. I think that's important. I think with infrastructure, it requires two or three things to come together, and I'm in danger of repeating myself, but I think the key thing is being really, really clear at the beginning. What is the infrastructure to achieve? Does it have an overarching either research agenda or purpose that can be clearly articulated? And what we find, certainly in the life sciences, is when researchers are engaged in that conversation and brought on board to say, okay, by sharing, we can achieve the following things, and they have in some way they can direct that, then that brings them along the path to being more sort of motivated to understand that, yeah, this is a benefit to all of us, and not just a burden. And I think that is, it's those cultural barriers that seem larger than the technical ones, I have to say.
No. But coming back to your comment, I mean, just a question, because I know, for example, what Maran gave us is like 5 years. So what Eisen you're giving us is what is happening in 2 years, and Marcel is that you're starting now. But being in the community for so long, I can say that I can hear this. For the past 10 years, I've been listening to the same story. Is culture change, where we know that the culture has changed tremendously now in other ways, but not in open, not in open science. So I see small steps being taken forward, but not a culture shift, I would say. And then Eisen, you can respond to that and respond to all of these. I saw from Mercedes' slide, the open science plan, national plans. So we have plans like that, but the plans can be like 10-year longs, 15 years long, but they're not actually actionable. How actionable or how fast actionable are they? And maybe it's me that I'm just pushing, and the community is needs to be there. But where are we? This is so. Eisen, you can start by answering that on this.
Yeah, I share the anxiety. We want things to move fast, but then it takes time also. And if you're looking into cultural change, it takes time. One of the strategies we use to be able to live with that anxiety, but at the same time to show results to the community, is that we We picked a couple of our funds for research that were socially oriented. So basically funds we opened because of COVID, and funds we are opening now because of climate change. And to those specific funds, we included the mandate for open access. So we said, okay, if you receive one of these funds that are completely aligned with the needs of the country and that are contingent to crisis that we are living as a society, we're going to give you money, but the results need to be completely open. And at the same time, we open the platforms for them to deposit the data or the results of that specific science. So it was connected to the needs, to the immediate needs of the country, and for one or two specific funds. And with that, what we achieved is that we had a group of researchers that saw that it's not the end of the world, it's not extremely hard, and it's something that it's completely doable. We as an agency got the experience to see, okay, this is doable, this has all these different challenges, this is where we need more hands and brains to be able to manage. And that way we were able to correct by piloting some of the initiatives. Okay. It's still a very small part of our total funding, but it's a good learning experience, and it's something that we can capture and show to everybody to basically convince that it's not that hard and it can be done.
Okay, so, okay, steps. Marcel, you have your...
Yes, Natalia, just wanted to say, because you were, when I showed the plans, it seemed like there was no implementation of the plans, but I think every one of these plans has come with a strategy of implementation. There has been steps forward. So yes, cultural shift is difficult to measure at what point things switch completely, and it's more common that things happen in small steps, right? But because of that doesn't mean that it's not happening. But I mean, I can speak for some of the cases, not all of them, but in Catalonia, a lot of the work that has been done in open science has been quite impactful already. I mean, the fact that there is already a platform for 10 universities to share their research data, and this is provided as a service from the consortium of the universities in Catalonia, right? It means that there is a solution that it's just readily available there for anybody who doesn't have already domain-specific repository to share the data, right? They have an option if they don't have one of their own. So that's one way of facilitating these efforts, right? Of making it easier. Yeah, and the other thing is that all the universities in Catalonia also are committed to the mandate of open access. So there are steps forward. And I remember only a few years ago, none of these were the case, right? We were still in a... Yeah, so I think it does move forward. I think that because we always have more work ahead, and because research outputs are growing, there is always one more thing, right, to do.
So what you're saying is that we're accelerating, which is good. So it was a start, and now we're accelerating. Okay, I know that there are some questions, especially for Marcel in the chat. So maybe Marcel, you can, because they are specific to you. What I would like to to go now, I know we're going to be like 10 minutes late, if that's okay with everyone, is to say about the global alignment. So it's nice what you're doing, in your countries. Erin, we realize, the effort you're doing in aligning, these funders, these charities, these private funders at a level. So now we have, the UNESCO recommendations. Okay, so the UNESCO recommendations are global. They will be probably voted by countries. Yeah, I know that Maran is very, very active in that. Probably, more of you are active. Is that how do you see these? Are they going to be a catalyst? Are they going to be, taking into account? And what is the relationship between, of these UNESCO recommendations with the open government and open science? So how does this all bind together? This is, practically, not on on words, but practically. what is the flow in a country when they vote for these UNESCO recommendations, okay, that is not active in open science, or that is starting to being active now? How is it going to help them, and how is it going to help the global alignment? Does anyone would some? Okay, Maran.
Some answers to your questions. The first one is that maybe you remember that 10 years ago, UNESCO started to take into account open access. And when I was younger, I was asked by the president of the University of Aix-Marseille to define a policy for open science and mainly open access. So I was a bit impressed. It was difficult for me to say, okay, I think that EU should have an open access policy, or the Budapest Open Access Declaration says that you need an open access policy. But there was the UNESCO proposal concerning open access policies. So I use it a lot. And at this time, the president of the university, the rector, decided to have an open access policy. So he was not aware of open access. He was a physician. He was not interested in open science, but the UNESCO name was interesting for him.
Okay.
So I think that it's a way to gain attention in communities, in institutions that are not yet convinced. The other thing I see is that it's the first time that we don't have declarations or recommendations coming only from the north. So, for example, the proposal coming from Germany concerning the transforming agreements, it's coming from the rich countries. We discussed deeply with poor and rich and middle poor countries at the UNESCO level. And now we have a framework convenient for every country. Now this recommendation is not only dealing about Germany, France, UK, and US or Canada. It's also dealing with issues concerning global south and different size of countries and healthiness of countries. So it's very important to have this document that will be, in fact, yes, you're right, voted in mid-November in Paris. So in fact, for me, of course, it's a sheet of paper. People couldn't say, okay, it's only words and words and words, but it's called soft power. You have an influence having this set of principles that are very good quality.
Okay, thank you. Eisen.
So let me respond from the global south, right? Because I completely relate to what Mahin was saying. As a global south country, when you try to find funding for initiatives like this, it's really hard when you say, well, Germany did it or France did it, because we're at different levels of expenditure in R&D, right? We're far away from that. But when you have multilateral organizations such as UNESCO, UN, or others that can put forward a plan that it's doable by the entire country, by the entire world, basically all the countries, regardless of their level of investment, then it becomes something that it's doable. And when something is doable, then finding funding for that becomes much more easier. And then also, and this is related to something Erin said, it allows you to align the speech around the initiatives, right? You start talking about the same language, and then the words you use are similar, and then we can all come to this conference and we're basically speaking the same language. And that also reflects on our community that can see that it's not something that is happening in Chile, but it's a general movement around the world, and that it's also something that will help them move forward their science and make it more international as well.
Okay, so that's good to know, because so what you're saying is, is a common story between countries, south and north, private and public funders, researchers. Do researchers, probably will reach to researchers, and then that this is a leverage for funding in order to implement. So these are the three messages that I hear. So which is good. Okay. So and then I think the last question is okay. So we say we have discussed the different implementation modes between public and private funders. Because so from Erin, what I got is the fact is that what you are building it needs to be built on community-based and community-sustained infrastructure. So this is where I can see the commonality. So commitments to international alignment, I can see it as a catalyst through the UNESCO recommendation. So I can see that funders, public funders, will start to commit, or if they haven't done so already, through such recommendations. So may I have a closing remark from you, starting from Erin again?
Yeah, no, just to comment on the UNESCO part. I think, as everyone was saying, I think it serves as this very powerful, positive signaling mechanism. Maybe we're not all going to end up with the same policy, but we're all kind of moving towards the same goal. And I think that's a powerful statement. And again, to also emphasize what Myron was saying, that there is a consideration of other countries in here. And I think that's very important for private funders and public funders to look at as we're moving forward with open policy. We want to move forward, but we also want to be very conscious as we're moving forward. Are our policies having any unintended consequences? Are they designed for only a subset of countries or a subset of institutions? Or, are we considering what Rob was saying about the emphasis on being equitable, right? Are our policies equitable? Are we moving forward with that in mind? So I would just, I guess, emphasize that both public and private funders, as we move forward in open science, have to keep that equity element first and foremost, and think about what are the actual global consequences of the policies that we're developing.
Okay. Also, maybe Aizen, you go next, and somebody in the chat said, could you speak a little specifically about the role of university libraries will play in advancing the national open science agenda? I don't know if you wanted to mention that.
Absolutely. So libraries are our main partners, right? They're drivers for implementation. Most of the science in Chile is done at the universities, and therefore they're the perfect link with the researcher community. And they are the ones we are focusing the funding for in order to create infrastructure and cultural change and capacity building. So they were the first we contacted. They help us do the initial diagnosis of our ecosystem, and then we hope that they will become drivers for implementation as well. So they're very, very important partners. And then as a final remark, I'm going to use the advertisement time. We will have a conference in Chile in October 26th, where we're trying to mix the idea of open knowledge and open science in order to get to a broader audience, not only researchers, but the community that is interested in the open. So we'll have presenters from all over the world. We're going to see different experiences in open libraries, open museums, and also open science. So we're going to send the invitation to everyone. It would be great if you could attend.
That would be great. So that's a virtual event, right?
It's a virtual event, and we send an invitation to Maha to present. So
great. Marissa, how about you next?
On the topics of the UNESCO or in general?
Because I think you were busy responding to the questions. is a closing remark, because then it's you, then it's Maren, and I will leave Robert at the end.
Yeah, I think I would think that as a closing remark, I'd like to just reflect on putting the society, the citizen in a very broad way, right? The individual living in society in the center, and see what do we bring back to that. So we're thinking of open science and all the efforts associated with open science to make science more transparent, but also more reliable, right, and more accountable. So we want to translate at the end that to a common good and an improvement of how we are better informed. There is a huge problem about that. So if we cannot translate it to just have better informed citizens, right? It's a problem, and science and the data associated with science and the research outputs that are getting published. If we're going to make it more open, how do we translate them to really impact, well, to be understood by our citizens, so that we can gain that we're well informed and we can gain this knowledge that will help us to make personal decisions, but also government decisions and other policies. So I think just gaining that back and putting that in the center will help us to bring many efforts together and have a bigger impact.
Okay, thank you, Maran.
A few words to say is that sometimes we feel alone because we are facing difficulties, change is slow. So the first thing is that we are a community there. So it's good to see everybody going in the same direction. And what we have, the difficulties that we are facing is that researchers imitate researchers. So they say, we have always done this way and we will not change. But there is an opportunity. If some researchers change, then the imitation process will follow. So researchers, by connections with other researchers, will imitate themselves. So we can start small. We can convince small groups, small communities, and then help them to open their data and publications. And then we can hope that other communities will follow by the imitation process. Because the scholarly community is really an imitating community for the bad and for the good.
Thank you. I think, I think this is why we said, the open science communities, and this is why we had the theme of this conference. So Robert, a small remark of what you've listened, because what you're doing and what you listened.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is interesting, as I think I said, my experience has mainly been within the life sciences, agriculture and medicine. But what I think is very, very clear is that everybody has to make their own journey. It wasn't so long ago that in the life sciences, we were very jealous of what was being done in physics, where it was the norm, international collaboration and publishing a paper as a preprint, and all these things had been going on in the physics community for years. Now it looks like with the pressure of COVID, we've perhaps advanced quicker in the life sciences than in other areas. And I completely agree with Marin. It's about providing those kind of case studies that people, if they can see the benefits, then they'll adopt and use them. And I'll just end with, I remember sitting in London when I was working at the Royal Society, and we were discussing about the impact of online publication, and the person who was in charge of the journals at the Royal Society very clearly said, I can't see a day when anybody would choose to read a paper online. That's never going to happen. We're never going to do that. And then, of course, now I don't know anybody who actually reads a journal on paper anymore. So there has been change, maybe not as fast as we'd like, but and I think the full impact of what the internet has enabled and what it can do hasn't really come to fruition yet. But I still remain optimistic that that basic infrastructure is in place, and therefore we will get to a better place of sharing and openness sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to to close by thanking you all by that we are following you. All the countries or area now we will follow what you're doing. But it's really nice to have to see what I would say doers, because this is what we're missing. We're missing the doers part. So it's not, going from the theory to the implementation. And in implementation, what we see is this is what we would like to follow. So I would like to give, to thank you all for having, for spending the time to let us all, discuss a few things. Even if we knew some of this, I think it's very important that we, put them on the table again. And as Maran said, is that we know that we're not, each of us is not alone out there, and this is really important. Thank you all, and I'm closing this section. This session. I know that people, they have had problems in joining because of the links. What I would like to just present to the world is let me, if you can share the screen, is just a glimpse of the next three parallel workshops. So the Zoom link now is on the program. So one is about learning lessons from fair data implementation, good practices from universities across Europe. I think this is a European University Association workshop. The next one is on channeling open science for sustainable management of the ocean. So this is where a community around data from the ocean presents what they are doing, and how are they implementing open science and what are the challenges. And then Open Air Connect, we have a service, and I think this is a hands-on workshop on how to use the service. So again, thank you very, very much for your time. And I am closing the session. Bye-bye, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.